Howdy, guy who always gives likes in the post-game lobby Fallout here, and even though I've already made a regular tips and tricks video on Marvel Rivals, I've now officially established myself as a 150 plus hour degenerate. I can stop anytime I want, guys. So today, why don't we go over some advanced tips and tricks to hopefully make your Marvel Rivals grinding a little bit smoother. Tip number 1, create space on attack. Let me give you an example of what I mean. On the Tokyo 2099 Shin Shibuya map, when you're on attack, I see so many teams immediately confine themselves into this horrible bottleneck right here at the beginning of the map. If you do nothing, you're making way more work for yourself and your team. We all know there are destructible environments in the game which you can view by activating your chronovision, but why wait for them to crumble naturally in combat? If you're on offense, as soon as the match begins, start shredding this entire building to your left. By doing so, you're giving you and your team so much more room to push in collectively, more angles to flank, more everything. Now you don't have to go in through that little bottleneck and get collectively clapped on the same map. If you're on defense, the Alchemax building out in the street, why sit there and wait for it to get busted up? Demolish it early so you can create that ramp for you and your team to more easily go up and take the high ground. Destructible environments are more than just fun game design. They can give your team more angles, better positioning, and more advantage over the enemy team. Take note not only of what walls you can break, but what possibilities they can open up for your team. And on that note, tip number 2, positioning is everything. For example, take the Royal Palace Domination map on Guard. Totally nailed it. When the match begins, I see a lot of players just beelining straight for the objective right away. And while I understand why you'd want to do that, remember that positioning is everything. The next time you and your buddies play this game type on this map, try detouring and going for the high ground instead. It's so much easier to deal damage and wipe teams when you're fighting with a positional advantage. You even have these awesome balconies over on the side where you can start ripping people up right off the bat with characters like Hela, Punisher, Moon Knight, Hawkeye, and so on and so forth. Then, as you begin to rip the other team in half, then go and capture the objective. Doesn't matter the map or the game type, start looking around with more than just the objective in mind. Where can you go that would make it harder for other players to deal with you or your team? Find new angles, get the high ground, and learn how to abuse it. Tip number 3, watch high rank matches. Follow me here. From the main menu, go up to the top right corner and click your PFP image to take you to the career page. From there, click on the leaderboard tab up at the top. You will now find yourself staring at the current global leaderboard of ranked players in Marvel Rivals. Right-click any name you want and hit View Career, and now up at the top, click on History. You now have the ability to watch any of their recently played games in any mode, including ranked play. If you want to watch the flow of the game at the top level, then just pick and watch any game. If you want to watch how people play at the top level with a specific character, then click Open that game lobby and see if the character you're trying to get better with was used in that match. If they were, great, watch the replay and remember that you have the option to watch the match from the POV of any player in the lobby. So just watch the match from that character's POV and take mental notes on how they play. What attacks and combos do they use and when? What positioning do they take? When and where do they use their ult? Take in everything. The fact that Marvel Rivals lets you easily watch matches from the POV of basically any player at all is wild. And again, if you really want to get better, this is probably the number one thing you should do overall. And on that note, tip number 4, if you can, check out tourneys. Again, watching and learning from those at the top of the pyramid can be really helpful to those trying to level up their game. Whereas watching individual matches can be beneficial on learning a specific character better, watching tourneys can give you more of a 30,000-foot view idea on the meta and the competitive scene as a whole. Seeing how teams specifically perform and play together, what hero matchups they prefer and do well with and on what maps, it can be really enlightening. People always go very hard when there's money on the line. And by the way, I know that Marvel Rivals is still a very young game, but tourneys have been happening already. Just remember to keep in mind the date and time of said tourneys. After all, learning from a current season tourney would be way more valuable than trying to learn from a past season tourney. Tip number 5, learn and memorize all health pack locations per map. Even though I'm sure your support players are trying their best, eventually there will come a time where they will get shoved into a locker. Not if, but when that happens, you'll be glad you did the following. From the menu, hit play, then change mode, pick custom game, then click create to make a lobby, lock it down so it's only you, pick any map you want, and then just spend time exploring the nooks and crannies of each map, looking for these. You know them, you love them, health pack locations. These, as you probably know, can make all the difference in a match, aka being able to heal yourself if your support player is busy or dead. Also, heroes like Spider-Man will especially want to know these locations because it's not easy to get consistent healing when you spend 95% of the match zooming around like a falcon on cocaine. Find the health pack locations and make a mental note of where they are. You can even find some locations where you get a double whammy, aka a nice defensive position holding the high ground near a health pack. Tip number 6, know what ults you can counter and what ults can counter you. This is knowledge you can either develop over time by playing games naturally, or you can hop into the practice range with a buddy and do a little fiddling around. The more you play Rivals, the more characters you'll learn how to play, but if you have a select few main characters, which most people do, you'll want to know all the ins and outs of that character. That very much includes what ults you can counter and what ults can counter you. For example, I play a lot of Doctor Strange, and I know that if I have a full shield charge, I can be a huge pain to any enemy Hela that tries to pop her ultimate. I just float up there and pop my shield right in her grill. This isn't 100% guaranteed. I'll eventually run out of shield charge, and I can also get shot down by the enemy team from behind, but 90% of the time, it's a counter worth attempting for me. I also know that as a Doctor Strange player, I'll almost never pop my ult if there's an enemy Doctor Strange who is still alive. Reason being, he can simply block my ultimate with his shield and it all goes down the drain. Take some time practicing in the practice range with a buddy or just making a mental note every time you're in a match and you get horribly shut down when trying to use your ultimate. Learn what kind of things counter your ult and what kind of enemy ults your main can counter. And on that note, tip number 7, keep a loose mental timer of enemy ults. While you can hit the tab button at any point during a match to see the ultimate timer of anybody on your own team, the game won't show you the status of the enemy team's ultimates, which is understandable. Therefore, you should be taking loose mental notes of who on the enemy team has and has not used their ultimate and about how long it's been, give or take, since the last one was popped. This will give you a better idea of if the enemy may be about to push your entire team with ultimates or not. Now, you might be thinking, what's the point? They're going to use it one way or the other, and we might not be able to do anything about it anyway. True, but if you know an enemy ult push is coming, you can potentially bait it out with your team and then immediately fall back, ideally wasting some or all of their ultimates. Always try to keep mental notes when you can on what ultimates are likely coming down the pipe from the enemy team and communicate that to your own team. And while we're talking about ultimates, tip number 8, coordinate ultimates with your team. Again, by hitting tab during a match, you can see how close your teammates are to their ultimates, which you should be keeping an eye on. Try to coordinate ultimate pushes with your team if you can, as using them together can make you much more likely to succeed in getting a complete team wipe. If you have 2 support players on your team, which is what you should have going on like 99% of the time, try to have a general idea of who will be using their ultimate for what situation. For example, when playing Season 1 Ranked, my buddy and I came to the agreement that for most of the time, he'd try using his Invisible Woman ultimate for offensive plays, while I would save my Mantis ultimate for defensive counter plays. This can help prevent situations where an enemy duelist may pop their ultimate and 2 or more support players pop their ultimates at the same time to try and counter when really only one of you needed to do it in the first place. One more tip related to ultimates. Tip number 9, learn the variations between ultimate sound cues. As I'm sure you know, every time a character in Rivals pops their ultimate, they shout a particular in-game voice line. However, you'll hear a different line depending on if that player using their ultimate is on your team as opposed to the enemy team. For example, if Hela is on your team, you'll hear
a feast for my crows.
And if the Hela is on the enemy team, you'll hear
Hell unleashed!
The more you play the game, the more you'll pick up on this, but it's important to really try and memorize the difference between those lines. Reason being, if you're not necessarily paying attention and your teammate Hela, for example, pops her ultimate, you want to avoid a situation where you panic and maybe do something stupid like activate your Luna Snow ultimate because you thought you were helping counter an enemy ultimate. But before we get to the next tip, a topic that actually makes me kind of jumpy to talk about: doxing, swatting, and stalking. Really disturbing trends in the world of gaming and streaming. It's uncomfortable uncomfortable to think about, but the reality is that your personal online data can be sold online by data brokers without you ever knowing. Protect yourself and your online data with Delete Me, sponsor of today's video. Delete Me is a hands-free subscription service that will remove your personal information that's being sold online. Delete Me's privacy experts remove you from hundreds of data brokers all year long. You can get a privacy report in just 7 days, and Delete Me continues to monitor sites and repeats removals as needed. Remove all your personal data you wouldn't want shared, like phones, addresses, and more. Since the ways companies collect, share, and sell your data are always changing, so must online privacy solutions as well. Delete Me's list of sites they remove from continually changes as the data broker industry expands and alters. They add features regularly to ensure their service is both simple to use and effective in removing personal information. Don't wait. Go to joindeleteme.com/fallout and use promo code Fallout to get 20% off Delete Me consumer plans. Again, that's 20% off at joindeleteme.com/fallout with promo code Fallout, and a big thank you to Delete Me. All right, we back. Tip number 10, know when to push and when to fall back. While holding your ground on the objective is obviously very important, it's not something you need to be doing 100% of the time in every game. For example, if you're in a situation where your team is nearing victory and domination and the other team is all collectively respawning, that would be a pretty ideal situation to push up as a team. Now, I'm not saying go all the way up and knock on their spawn door, but push up and slow their approach back to the point, especially if there's little time left on the clock for them to do so. Make their job of getting back to the point harder, and maybe even force them to use an ultimate or two before reaching the point. And in a similar vein, if the other team is starting to activate a bunch of ultimates to try and gain ground, know when to collectively fall back and retreat a little bit. Better to yield a bit of ground now and fight to reclaim it than to needlessly die and have to wait so long to respawn and walk all the way back to the objective. Tip number 11, know hero matchups and counter pick when the time is right. I know a lot of people out there really just want to play and succeed with 1 or 2 or 3 characters all day long, and while that is possible, it's just not very likely. The benefit of knowing how to play many characters is that when you see opportunities to counter pick, aka change the hero you're currently playing mid-match because the enemy team may be weak to them, you can take advantage of those opportunities much more often. While grinding comp the other day, we were getting knocked around one game and noticed that the other team was rocking 3 tanks, and even though our teammate only had a decent understanding of the character, he counter-picked Wolverine, a known tank killer, and we came back and nailed that game hardcore. You may have to do some research, i.e. watching some YouTube videos on the subject, reading up on the forums, etc., but try to have a base understanding of character matchups so you can counterpick when the opportunity presents itself. And on that note, tip number 12, know when you're countered. Just as you should be able to take advantage of an enemy team who may be weak to a certain character, if you're in a position where you're getting hard countered, it might be time to make a change. And remember that there's no shame in doing so. Certain characters just have bad matchups against other characters. If you're playing Iron Man and you're getting completely ripped apart because of who the other team is playing, bitching and moaning on the mic about how badly they need to be nerfed isn't going to fix the situation. You changing to a different character that is less likely to get sniped out of the sky, while not guaranteed, may fix the situation. Do what you can to learn good character matchups, so in the event that you're getting hard countered, you can make a change. Tip number 13, don't trickle. I'm pretty certain I've already mentioned this in a previous guide, but I'm going to mention it again because it's really important. If you've died and you're heading back to the fight and you notice that your last lingering teammates have now died before you manage to get there and they're respawning, don't trickle in alone. If you do, you're willingly walking into a potential 1v6 situation, which you're almost guaranteed to lose. Sometimes you have to make a judgment call, i.e. half your team is alive and maybe you can get there really fast. It's not going to be the same situation every time, but for the love of God, if it's clear that you're walking into a 1v6, don't wait for your team to respawn, group up together, and push back to take back the objective as a group. And on that note, tip number 14, comms win games. If 2 teams of equal skill are fighting it out, the team that talks or communicates in some way will almost always win over the team that does not. If you're in quick play or a custom lobby, the stakes aren't as high. You don't need to go full throttle 100% of the time. But if you're trying to rank up in competitive, then you're straight up hurting your chances by not communicating with your team. Call out anything, where the healers are, if any enemies are alone or overextended, who has their ult, how many enemies are dead, what you plan to do, where you plan to go, enemies that are hiding and where. Talk to your teammates. And if you're a solo grinder who doesn't have a microphone, then tip number 15, use the ping wheel. From the main menu, hit the cog wheel in the top right, then go to settings, then either controller or keyboard, depending on your input method, and then the communication tab. While you do have access to a basic in-game ping system, you also have access to a more specific ping wheel. Your wheel can have either 4 or 8 options on it, and honestly, even if you just use the default 4 wheel, you're doing way more for your team than if you weren't communicating at all. The default options of attack here, the status of your ultimate, which you can basically use to signal to your team, hey, I'm about to use my fully charged ultimate, retreat, and need healing. Those 4 alone are plenty. Use them and communicate whenever you can. Tip number 16, don't settle for default. There's no rule that says you can't be a top 500 player with default settings, and I'm sure there's a bunch of cracked high rank players out there who haven't touched or changed one thing since launch. However, there's no reason to not experiment. I strongly recommend going to the practice range and fiddling with your horizontal and vertical sensitivity options in the settings menu. I find the default of 4 to be a bit too high and find myself a bit more accurate with something just a tad lower. Also, keep in mind that if you're on PC, you can also adjust your mouse DPI. Most people I know play on 800 these days, myself included. There's no perfect golden setting though. Fiddle around until you find what feels right and accurate to you. And remember, you can always just revert to default if you wind up not liking the changes you've made. Finally, tip number 17, don't harp on numbers, just do your job. For many of us, I'm sure, there have been times where we become overly focused on the end game numbers. Are they important? Sure, but becoming too focused on them can lead to you psyching yourself out, trying to overcompensate with wannabe hero plays, and effing up. If you're a Spider-Man player, odds are you're probably not going to get as much damage done as a more consistent damage dealing duelist on your team. But don't freak out and try to compete just so you can measure who has the bigger dick in the post-game lobby. Just do your job. You aren't the Punisher. You're going to fight at different ranges and in different ways. Don't try to completely reinvent the wheel because you're scared he's going to have a bigger damage dealt number than you at the end of the game. Just do your job. Be an opportunist diver who picks off back of the map support players. That's what you're supposed to do with Spider-Man. No matter who you're playing on the roster, don't psych yourself out. At the end of the day, a win is a win. All that matters is that you focus up and do what your team needs you to do in order to win the game. If you have any additional tips you'd like to share, by all means do so down in the comment section. Good luck on your rank 1 season grinding. Thanks very much for watching. Peace.